Clash of the Classics.
Welcome to another edition of Clash of the Classics. Today's feature is made possible by our friends at the Automatic Transmission Rebuilders Association. ATRA is the largest and oldest transmission network in the world. If you're experiencing transmission problems of any kind, or you have a transmission question, before you do anything, visit them at atra.com. All right, let's get right into it now. I'm Donnie. I'm your host for the next few minutes, and we're going to have some fun today. It's all about the 1969 Plymouth Cuda battling the 1970 Dodge Challenger RT 440 six-pack. I want to start with the 69 Plymouth Cuda. When Mopar dropped their largest displacement V8 into Barracuda back in 1969, they instantly earned bragging rights to the pony muscle car with the biggest engine. I don't think anyone would dispute that, but they also earned all the problems that went with it. And as with just about all things in life, there is a point where you can take a good thing a bit too far. The 1969 Plymouth Cuda 440 is a great example of that. And while it definitely ranks pretty high on the cool chart, and it certainly had the biggest engine of any contemporary pony car, there were a few problems that went along with it. Back in those days, Plymouth committed themselves to producing Barracuda as a 100% performance car. The Cuda name emerged to identify an all-new idea that Mopar had for fastback and hardtop models with the 340 or the 383 engines. But it wasn't until about mid-year that the coolest and baddest Cuda of all came in. Because of some of the intense pressure the Chrysler Corporation was feeling from the folks at Ford and GM, Plymouth made the decision to partner with Hearst Campbell to drop a big 440 into some select Cuda fastbacks and coupes. The results were great when it came to quarter-mile ETs, as some of the cars were scooting through in the mid to high 13s. But if you'll recall, when we first began this discussion, we mentioned that there were a few problems that came along with having the biggest engine in such a small car. And the first problem was it took Plymouth a couple years to finally find room under the hood of a 383 equipped Barracuda for the power steering unit. Well, in 1969, they got it all figured out, but then all of a sudden, the problem was right back again with the arrival of the 440. Bottom line was the engine bay was just too crowded with such a big engine and was somewhat near 60% of the weight over the front tires. Trying to steer the car during low speeds, one heck of a challenge. The second problem was no space available for the brake booster that was standard on other Cudas, so the 440 was forced to run drum brakes all the way around, which I'm sure most of you viewers know makes for some squirrely control during stopping. Lastly, the designers were concerned that running a 4-speed manual transmission would open up a can of worms, with owners dumping the clutch during hard launch and then destroying the rear differential. So the only transmission option was the TorqueFlite automatic. Now, not that there's anything wrong with that TorqueFlite 727. It's a monster of a transmission, but obviously it doesn't have the same feel, and it kind of totally changes the driving experience. On the track, it was sometimes tough to get the tires to bite, and in those days, the trans brake hadn't yet been fully developed, and the TorqueFlite didn't upshift as well as it would later on once Transco Corporation or even B&M developed their reprogramming kits. But on the positive side, out on the highway, the Cuda 440 would pass just about anything and everything except a gas station, and its steering and braking shortcomings could be overlooked, especially with the adrenaline rush of outstanding acceleration. However, all that being said, the car is still one of the coolest classics in the muscle car world. Original MSRP was right at $3,400. NADA Classic Car Guide lists the average value today at about $40,000. If any of our listeners out there actually has one of these cars, please message us here. We'd like to showcase your car on an upcoming episode. But before I go any further, I want to talk about the largest automatic transmission network on the planet. They're the Automatic Transmission Rebuilders Association. The ATRA makes our Clash of the Classics possible, and no one knows transmissions better than ATRA. With a member network stretching from coast to coast, there's no better place to be when your car is experiencing transmission troubles than an authorized ATRA service provider. Head on over to atra.com to find a service provider near you. All right, now let's talk about that 1970 Challenger RT 440 six-pack. As most of you know, Chrysler was a bit late to the pony car segment. In fact, it took Chrysler somewhere near 6 years to develop a true pony car, and by the time they released their Challenger model, there wasn't much that could be done to be considered revolutionary. One of the ways Dodge felt would get them noticed was to offer a plethora of engine choices, everything from a slant six to that all-impressive Hemi. Challenger used essentially the same unibody platform as the Barracuda. The difference was the wheelbase was about 2 inches longer, which provided a bit more legroom in the rear seat area. It was available in both hardtop and convertible styles. The standard RT power came from the 383 rated at 335 horsepower, and then there were 2 iterations of the 440 offered. The first was the 4-barrel Magnum with 375 horsepower, and the second was the tri-carb 6-pack, which was rated at 390 horsepower. There was also the 426 Hemi, which was rated at 425 horsepower, but it also came at a pretty substantial cost of $1,228. The 440 engines and the Hemi both came standard with the TorqueFlite 727 automatic, and we've talked about that transmission several times here on our show, so I don't think we need to go into a lot of detail again, but suffice it to say that transmission is one of the best designs ever produced. Definitely capable of handling elevated horsepower and torque levels. There was a 4-speed manual option with a Hurst shifter inside and a beefy Dana 60 rear axle. Gear ratio options were 323 or the more competition-oriented 410-1. All the RT models were built with heavy-duty suspensions, with the 440 cars getting 15-inch 60 series tires. Disc brakes and power steering options were available, but they cost extra. The RT's standard hood had 2 air scoops that were open, but they didn't feed directly into the air cleaner. There was a shaker hood option available for about $100 that mounted to the air cleaner, and then it kind of protruded through a cutaway in the hood. Full gauges, including a tack, were standard equipment, and RTs could also be ordered with special edition equipment, which included leather seats, a vinyl roof, and a smaller rear window. And just like some of the newer GM Sport platforms, outward visibility wasn't the best. There was an annoying blind spot at the rear roof line that could sometimes create problems, but overall outward appearance was incredibly awesome. Great stance, had a cool, aggressive look that continues to inspire even the newest Challenger. In 1970, the Hemis were definitely the quickest, but not by enough to justify the higher cost over the next most potent iteration, the 440 6-pack. During my research, I ran across several articles on this car, and as you can imagine, a lot has been said over the years about the Challenger, but one in particular really stood out. Road Test magazine said this of its 6-pack Challenger, quote, "The explosion comes when you stuff your foot down on the gas pedal, either on purpose or accidentally. The car squirts forward like an unleashed dragster, and suddenly you're way above the speed limit." Well said, Road Test magazine. I believe anyone who's ever driven one of these cars would completely agree with that. My older sister and her husband actually had one of these cars. They bought it new from a dealer in Los Angeles, and it was definitely a blast. Thanks for hanging out with us today. That's just about all the time we have for our show. Big thanks to everyone out at the Automatic Transmission Rebuilders Association. ATRA makes our Clash of the Classics features possible. Next time you think you have a transmission problem or you've got some sort of a transmission question, check them out anytime at atra.com. We'll see you next week.